I didn't know that almost drowning would be the most alive I had ever felt. I was 22 when I decided to stop being the cautious version of myself. I had just graduated in architecture. I had a job lined up that felt safe but uninspiring, and I had recently ended a relationship that faded the way most things in my life did, quietly, without confrontation, without fire. I told myself I needed a break before adulthood swallowed me whole. That's how I ended up alone on the California coast, staring at an ocean that didn't care how organized I was. If you enjoy stories about summer love, second chances, and women who meet again when life thinks it's done with them, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I always wonder where these confessions travel. The surf school was smaller than I expected, a wooden shack with peeling blue paint and boards stacked against the wall. I almost turned around. Surfing wasn't something people like me did. People like me observed waves from the shore, but I had promised myself I would stop being predictable. That's when I saw her. She was leaning against a board, barefoot, sunburned in the effortless way of someone who lived outside. Her hair was still wet, darker at the ends, and she was laughing at something another instructor had said. There was something unapologetic about the way she occupied space. Not loud, just certain. When her eyes landed on me, she didn't look away. "You here for the beginner lesson?" she asked. Her voice wasn't sweet. It wasn't sharp either. It was steady, confident. I nodded, suddenly aware of how out of place I felt in my oversized t-shirt and borrowed confidence. "I'm Mia," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was warm and firm. She didn't release it immediately, just long enough for something in my chest to shift. The ocean was colder than I expected. The board felt unstable beneath my feet. I tried to remember her instructions. Balance. Breathe. Don't look down. The first wave hit, and I panicked. My legs locked. The board slipped. Water swallowed me before I had time to think. Salt burned my throat. Sound disappeared. The world turned into pressure and panic. Then an arm wrapped around my waist. Strong, decisive. She pulled me up with surprising ease, guiding me back to the surface. When I broke through the water, coughing and disoriented, her face was inches from mine. Droplets clung to her eyelashes. Her hand was still at my waist. "You okay?" she asked, softer now. I should have been embarrassed. Instead, I laughed. The kind of shaky laugh that comes from adrenaline and relief. My hands were still gripping her shoulders when I realized how close we were. Too close for strangers. Close enough to feel her breath mix with mine. "I think I swallowed the Pacific," I said. She smiled, not mockingly, not politely, something warmer. "That means you're officially part of it now." She adjusted my stance once we climbed back onto the board. Her hands moved to my hips to steady me, not lingering, but not rushed either. She stood behind me as another wave approached. "Trust me," she said. Not the wave. Me. This time when the swell lifted us, I didn't freeze. I didn't think. I let my body follow her voice. The board steadied for a second that felt impossibly long. The horizon opened in front of me, wide and endless. When we fell again, we were laughing. On the shore later, wrapped in oversized towels, she handed me a bottle of water and watched me like I was something curious she hadn't quite figured out yet. "You're not scared of drowning," she said. I frowned. "I absolutely am." She shook her head. "No. You're scared of letting go." I didn't know how she saw that so quickly. The lesson ended. Other students left in groups. I stayed longer than necessary, pretending to reorganize my bag. She stayed too, wiping sand off her board. "You coming back tomorrow?" she asked without looking at me. I was thinking about it. "You should." There was no pressure in her tone, just certainty. As I walked back toward my rental room, my body still humming from salt and sun, I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't come to the coast for inspiration. I had come to feel something I couldn't design, control, or draft. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted tomorrow to arrive faster. I went back the next morning pretending it was about finishing what I had started. It wasn't. It was about her. The ocean was calmer, or maybe I was. Mia was already in the water when I arrived, her silhouette cutting through the waves with a kind of ease that looked almost arrogant. She noticed me before I could call out. A small nod. No big greeting, like she had expected me. "You didn't quit," she said when I reached her. "I don't like unfinished things." Her smile tilted slightly. "Good." This time, when she guided me onto the board, her touch lingered half a second longer than necessary. I felt it everywhere. In my stomach, in my throat, in the way my breathing shifted without permission. I told myself it was just proximity, just instruction, but the space between her hands and my skin felt charged. I managed to stand on the board for 3 full seconds that morning. 3 seconds of balance, horizon, wind. When I fell, she was laughing again, and I was laughing with her, but this time she didn't let go of my hand when we surfaced. We stayed in the water longer than the lesson required. Eventually, the other students drifted back to shore, leaving just the 2 of us floating lazily between sets. The sun was higher now, warming our shoulders. "So, architect," she said, splashing water lightly in my direction. "What made you decide to fight the ocean this week?" I hesitated. "A breakup," I admitted, "and the feeling that I've been playing safe for too long." She watched me carefully, not in a pitying way, just attentive. "Safe is overrated," she said. "And drowning isn't," I teased. She moved closer, her board bumping lightly against mine. "Depends on what you're drowning in." There it was again, that shift in the air. Not obvious. Not dramatic. Just something tightening invisibly between us. That afternoon, she offered to show me a quieter stretch of beach, with better waves. It was farther from the surf school, past the pier and down a sandy path framed by low cliffs. We carried the board side by side. Our arms brushed once, then again. Neither of us apologized. The beach was nearly empty, the tide low, the light softer. We didn't rush into the water. We sat first, boards resting behind us, knees bent, toes digging into warm sand. Conversation flowed easily about competitions, about the pressure of sponsors, about how she hated interviews because they always tried to turn her into a headline. "They don't really care about who you are," she said. "They care about the story that sells." "And what's your story?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. "I don't know yet." The honesty of that answer surprised me. The wind shifted, lifting strands of her hair across her face. Without thinking, I reached out to brush them away. My fingers barely grazed her cheek, but it was enough. The air stilled. Her eyes flicked to my mouth. I felt my pulse everywhere. "This is probably a bad idea," I murmured. "Probably," she agreed. Neither of us moved away. She closed the distance first. The kiss wasn't urgent. It wasn't dramatic. It was tentative at first, like testing temperature before stepping fully in. Her lips were warm from the sun, salty from the ocean. My hands found her shoulders instinctively, and when she pulled me closer by the waist, the world narrowed to breath and touch. I had been kissed before. This felt different. There was laughter between us when we broke apart. Not because it was funny, but because it was overwhelming. She rested her forehead against mine. "Still think this is about surfing?" she asked softly. I shook my head. We didn't rush into anything more. Instead, we walked into the water again, boards under our arms, but now every glance carried weight. Every brush of skin felt intentional. Later, as the sky turned orange and pink, we lay side by side on the sand, shoulders touching. The sun dipped slowly toward the horizon. "How long are you here?" she asked. 3 more days. She exhaled slowly. "Then we'll make them count." There was no promise beyond that, no illusion of forever, just the quiet understanding that something had begun. As we stood to leave, she reached for my hand openly this time. Not hiding it, not questioning it. 5 days suddenly didn't feel short. They felt dangerous. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to protect myself from that. The 3rd night didn't feel like something that was supposed to end. It started simply. Fish tacos from a place near the pier, eaten straight from the paper wrapping while we sat on the hood of her car watching the sky darken. She told me about the first time she competed outside California. I told her about my fear of designing something that would stand for decades and still feel wrong. We weren't performing for each other anymore. We were just there. When she suggested we drive somewhere quieter, I didn't hesitate. The stretch of beach she chose was almost empty, lit only by a pale moon and the distant glow of houses along the cliff. The ocean was calmer at night, but louder somehow. We walked barefoot, our shoulders brushing occasionally, until she stopped near a lifeguard tower. "You ever feel like you're about to make a mistake you won't regret?" she asked. I laughed softly. "That's oddly specific." She stepped closer. "I mean it." There was no crowd, no lesson, no teasing this time, just us. The kiss she gave me then was different from the one earlier that afternoon. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't testing. It was certain. Her hands moved to my waist, pulling me in fully, and I wrapped my arms around her neck without thinking. The world shrank to heat and breath, and the steady crash of waves behind us. We stumbled back toward the sand, laughing once before the laughter dissolved into something deeper. My back met cool grains, her body hovered over mine for a moment, giving me space to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. When she kissed me again, it was slower, unhurried, exploratory. My hand slid under her shirt, feeling the warmth of her skin, the muscle shaped by years of surfing. She inhaled sharply at the contact, and that sound did something reckless to me. "Still think this is a bad idea?" she whispered against my mouth. "Yes," I breathed. She smiled. "Good." We didn't rush, but we didn't hold back either. There was something almost disbelieving in the way we touched, like neither of us expected the other to stay. Fingers traced collarbones, shoulders, hips. The ocean breeze cooled overheated skin. When she rolled onto her back and pulled me with her, I felt weightless and anchored at the same time. Later, lying side by side with sand clinging to our legs, she traced invisible lines across my arm. "I don't do this," she admitted quietly. "Surf?" I teased. She nudged me. "Feelings." I turned to face her. "You don't have to." She studied me carefully. "You're leaving in 2 days. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact." "I know." She didn't ask me to stay. I didn't ask her to come with me. We chose the present instead. The next morning, she had a competition. I stood among the crowd near the shore, heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with waves. When she won, she looked for me before she looked for anyone else. That look, quick, electric, private, felt like ours. But fame doesn't stay private for long. I flew home the day after that. We had kissed goodbye at the airport parking lot, sun barely up, both pretending this wasn't heavier than we'd agreed it would be. "Call me when you land," she said. "I will." The first few hours back home felt unreal. My apartment looked smaller than I remembered. The air felt still. I unpacked slowly, replaying her hands on my waist, her laugh against my mouth. That afternoon, I turned on the TV to watch the sports recap. They replayed her winning wave, slow motion, dramatic music. The interviewer smiled. "There were rumors this week that you were distracted. A summer romance, maybe." Mia laughed. Not cruelly, not awkwardly, just controlled. "It was just a 5-day romance," she said lightly. "Nothing serious." The crowd behind her chuckled. The interviewer moved on. I didn't. I stared at the screen, waiting for her to correct herself, to soften it, to look like she regretted saying it. She didn't. I turned off the TV before the silence in my apartment became unbearable. 5 days. Nothing serious. The ocean still lived in my skin. But suddenly, I didn't know if I had ever lived in hers. I didn't call her. That's the version I tell when I want to sound dignified. The truth is messier. I did pick up my phone that night. I typed her name. I stared at the number she had saved under a small wave emoji. I even pressed call. But before the ringing finished, before courage had time to exist, I remembered the interview. The laugh. Nothing serious? I hung up. Pride can feel like self-respect when you're 22. The next morning, there was a text from her. "You landed?" I read it 3 times. I didn't answer. If it wasn't serious, then neither was I. Hours turned into days. Days turned into silence. I waited for a second message. It never came. She probably waited for my reply. It never went. That's how 5 days turned into 8 years. I buried her the way I bury unfinished sketches, inside a folder labeled later. I threw myself into work. Architecture gave me something stable to hold on to. Lines behaved. Structures followed rules. Buildings didn't wake up one day and say you had meant nothing. I became good at what I did. Not famous, not headline material, but respected, reliable. I designed spaces that felt open, breathable, full of light. People said my projects had emotional intelligence. They didn't know I was just trying to recreate the feeling of standing on a board while someone steady held my hips from behind. I stopped watching surfing competitions. Mostly. Sometimes late at night, I would search her name anyway. Mia became everything she was supposed to become. Regional titles turned into national coverage. National coverage turned into international sponsorships. Interviews multiplied. Her hair got longer. Her smile got sharper. She learned how to speak in polished sentences. I told myself she had chosen exactly what she wanted, and I had chosen not to be it. 8 years later, My firm assigned me a project that felt like coincidence disguised as strategy. A luxury eco-resort renovation on the California coast. The same stretch of coast. I didn't realize it at first. Not until the plane descended and the curve of the shoreline looked painfully familiar. My stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with turbulence. The resort had been purchased by a new investor group aiming to redefine legacy. They wanted sustainability, modern design, a strong ambassador face attached to the relaunch. I sat through the first briefing without really listening. Slides flashed across the screen. Budget numbers, structural assessments, marketing projections. Then her face appeared on the presentation. Larger than life. Sunlit. Controlled. Beautiful. Mia Santos will be the official ambassador of the relaunch, the marketing director said enthusiastically. She'll retire at the end of this season and transition into brand leadership. Retire. The word hit differently than I expected. She's finishing her final competitive circuit this year, he continued. This resort will be her legacy project. My pulse was too loud in my ears. She's joining us for the on-site walkthrough tomorrow. Tomorrow. 8 years of silence, compressed into 24 hours. I told myself she wouldn't recognize me immediately. People change, haircuts, posture, expression. I had learned to carry myself differently, softer in some ways, harder in others. The next morning I arrived early. The resort looked older than I remembered. Weathered wood, faded paint. The ocean still just as wide. I was studying the original floor plans when I heard her laugh. I knew it before I saw her. It had matured. Lower now. Less impulsive. But it still carried that same edge of sunlight. I didn't turn around immediately, cowardice or self-preservation. I'm still not sure. When I finally did, she was standing near the reception area with 2 executives. Sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She looked taller somehow, stronger. Her body carried years of competition, of discipline. There was a faint scar near her shoulder I didn't remember. She glanced around casually, then her eyes found mine. Recognition doesn't always look dramatic. There was no gasp, no step backward. Just a stillness, a pause in her breathing that mirrored mine. The executives kept talking. Words about branding and timelines floated uselessly between us. She removed her sunglasses slowly. Sophie, she said. My name in her mouth again felt unfairly familiar. I forced a small smile. Hi, Mia. 8 years collapsed into the space between us. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she took a step closer. You're the lead architect? She asked. Yes. A beat. I didn't know. I didn't either. One of the executives interrupted cheerfully, unaware of the earthquake under the surface. Perfect. You two already know each other. This collaboration will be seamless. Seamless. I almost laughed. Mia held my gaze a moment longer than professionalism required. 8 years, 5 days. Nothing serious. But the way her eyes lingered told a different story. And for the first time since I turned off that television, I wondered if maybe I hadn't been the only one pretending. If anyone had told me that 8 years later I would be standing beside Mia discussing sustainable wood panels instead of unfinished feelings, I would have laughed. Yet there we were. The walkthrough began professionally enough. I explained structural concerns, sunlight angles, open-air corridors. She listened attentively, asking smart questions about accessibility, community integration, environmental impact. She wasn't just a face attached to the project. She was invested. And annoyingly impressive, but beneath the professional exchange, something else pulsed. Every time our hands brushed while studying blueprints, there was a flicker of awareness. Every time she leaned slightly too close to look at a detail on my tablet, I caught the scent of salt and sunscreen, familiar enough to unsettle me. At one point, the executives drifted ahead, distracted by a discussion about the infinity pool redesign. Mia slowed her steps until we were walking alone along the wooden deck facing the ocean. You look different, she said quietly. Older? I replied. She smiled faintly. More sure of yourself. That's what 8 years do. She nodded, then hesitated. You never called. There it was. I kept my gaze on the horizon. I saw the interview. Silence. Her jaw tightened slightly, not defensive, more like regret resurfacing. That wasn't for you, she said. That was for sponsors, for headlines. I was trying to control the narrative where I was nothing serious. She exhaled slowly. I didn't think you were watching. The answer was honest. Not satisfying, but honest. I was, I said. The ocean filled the space between us. I texted you, she continued. I know. You didn't answer. because I thought I was protecting myself. She looked at me then, fully, openly. And did you? I didn't respond immediately. No, I admitted. A breeze lifted her hair again, and for a split second, I saw the girl from 8 years ago. Not the brand, not the athlete. Just Mia. We were 22, she said softly. Yes. That's not an excuse, she added. No, but it explains some of it. Footsteps approached behind us, and we both straightened instinctively. The executives rejoined, all smiles and timelines. The rest of the afternoon was smoother, controlled, public. But when the meetings ended and the team dispersed, Mia lingered. I'm staying nearby, she said. There's a cafe down the street that still has terrible coffee. I raised an eyebrow. Inviting me to relive nostalgia? Inviting you to talk without microphones. I hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Fine. The cafe hadn't changed much. Worn wooden tables, surfboards mounted on the walls. The barista recognized her immediately. Fame has a way of following you even into small rooms. We chose a table by the window. So, she said after the drinks arrived, are you still afraid of drowning? I laughed softly. I'm afraid of miscommunication. Fair. The conversation shifted easily after that. We spoke about the project, about her retirement. She told me about the shoulder injury that made her decision inevitable. I told her about my firm, about designing spaces that felt like breathing. At one point, she reached across the table and brushed a crumb from the corner of my lip without thinking. The touch lasted less than a second. It felt like more. We both froze slightly at the contact. Sorry, she murmured. It's fine. It wasn't fine. It was charged. When we stepped outside, the sky was already deep blue, the air cooler. We stood awkwardly for a moment. Dinner tomorrow? She asked, casual but not careless. Is that professional? Probably not. I studied her expression. There was no arrogance in it, no assumption, just hope. Okay, I said. Her smile was smaller this time, more private. As I walked back to my hotel room, I realized something unsettling. The past hadn't faded, it had matured. And the woman who once said it was just 5 days was looking at me like she had been counting something far longer. The dinner was supposed to be simple, neutral territory, public setting, easy exit if things became uncomfortable. That was the plan. Mia chose a small restaurant overlooking the cliffs, the kind with soft yellow lights and linen napkins that tried to look casual, but weren't. I arrived 5 minutes late on purpose, as if that would somehow rebalance 8 years of silence. She was already there. No sunglasses this time, no entourage, just her. For a moment, when she stood to greet me, I felt that familiar shift in my chest. The same one from the first surf lesson, but this time, it wasn't adrenaline. It was awareness. You look, she began, then stopped. Like someone who didn't drown, I offered. She laughed, and the sound settled my nerves slightly, like someone who built something solid. We ordered food we barely touched. Conversation started light. Updates, travel stories, the absurdity of sponsorship contracts. But underneath it all, something heavier waited patiently. You hated that interview, she said eventually. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. Yes. She nodded once. I hated it too. I frowned slightly. Then why say it? She leaned back, exhaling slowly. Because if I made it serious, they would have made it messy. They would have dug into you, into us. I was just starting to get attention from sponsors. They look for distractions, so you erased me. I protected you. Her tone wasn't defensive, it was tired. That's not how it felt, I admitted. She held my gaze steadily. I know. Silence settled between us, not hostile, just honest. When the waiter cleared our plates, neither of us moved to leave. Outside, the sky had deepened into that inky blue that feels intimate without asking permission. Walk? She suggested. We stepped out onto the cliffside path, the ocean stretching dark and endless below. The wind was stronger here, lifting her hair, brushing it against my arm. You never answered my text, she said quietly. I thought if I responded, I'd be asking for something you didn't want. She stopped walking. And what if I did? I swallowed. You said it was nothing serious. That doesn't mean it was nothing. The distinction hit harder than I expected. I looked at her then. Not the surf star, not the ambassador, just Mia. Did you think about me? I asked before I could stop myself. Her answer came without hesitation. Yes. The honesty in her voice made it impossible to breathe normally. How often? I pushed. She stepped closer, close enough that the wind no longer felt cold. Enough. My pulse accelerated in a way that felt unfairly familiar. The space between us thinned. Not accidental this time, intentional. Her fingers brushed mine first. Testing, almost cautious. When I didn't pull away, she intertwined them gently. The contact was electric, but softer than before. Less reckless, more certain. "I don't want to repeat 22, she said. "I don't either." Her other hand moved to my waist slowly, giving me time to object. I didn't. The first kiss of this new chapter wasn't rushed like the one on the beach 8 years ago. It was deeper, slower, intentional. Her lips pressed to mine carefully at first, as if asking permission all over again. When I leaned in fully, she responded instantly, her grip tightening slightly at my waist. This kiss carried memory. It carried missed years. It carried everything we didn't say. My hand slid up along her shoulders, feeling the strength there, the scar near her collarbone. I traced it absent-mindedly, and she inhaled sharply. "That one's new," I whispered. "Championship finals," she murmured against my mouth. "Worth it." The wind tangled around us. The ocean roared below. We broke apart only when breathing demanded it. She rested her forehead against mine, exactly like she had at 22. "I don't want this to be 5 days again," she said softly. "It doesn't have to be." There was no dramatic declaration, no immediate decision, just understanding. When we finally walked back toward our cars, our hands remained linked openly, not hidden, not tentative. As I drove back to my hotel, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like someone reliving the past. I looked like someone choosing differently. And for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't afraid of what the ocean might bring back. After the cliffside kiss, pretending neutrality became impossible. The next morning at the resort, we tried. We stood side by side during meetings, discussed budgets, reviewed structural reinforcements. But something had shifted. Our hands found each other instinctively when no one was looking. Our eyes lingered too long. Every shared glance felt like a private conversation layered under the professional one. By the 3rd day of working together, the tension wasn't tension anymore. It was gravity. That afternoon, after a long design review session, rain started unexpectedly. Coastal storms move fast, sunlight 1 second, heavy clouds the next. The executives rushed to their cars, complaining about soaked shoes. Mia and I stayed behind on the wooden deck, watching the ocean turn darker under the shifting sky. "You always like dramatic weather," she said. "I like things that make you feel small," I replied. She stepped closer. "You never felt small to me." The rain began lightly at first, misting across our skin. I laughed softly, tilting my face upward. She watched me like she was memorizing something. "You're still reckless in the rain," she murmured. "And you're still dramatic." She reached for me without hesitation this time. The kiss was immediate, rain cooling our overheated skin. Her hand slid around my waist, pulling me flush against her. Mine moved beneath her damp shirt, feeling warmth and muscle and certainty. There was nothing tentative left between us. We stumbled toward the covered entrance of the resort, laughing breathlessly. Once inside, the world narrowed again. Just the echo of rain on the roof and our uneven breathing. She pressed me gently against the wall. "Tell me to stop, if you want to," she said. I shook my head. Her mouth found my neck, slower now, deliberate. My fingers threaded through her hair, tugging slightly, and she exhaled against my skin. The contact was intense but not rushed. Mature. Like we were learning each other again. Not reclaiming something old, but building something new. Her hands traced the curve of my waist, my back, memorizing. Mine moved over her shoulders, down her arms, feeling strength shaped by years of discipline. When she lifted her head, her eyes weren't playful. They were vulnerable. "I was scared back then," she admitted quietly. "Everything was happening fast. Sponsors, expectations. I didn't know how to have something real without losing control." "You didn't lose control," I said softly. "You lost me." She closed her eyes briefly at that. "I don't want to do that again." Neither did I. We moved slower after that, back to my hotel room this time, walking instead of rushing. The rain softened outside, the air smelling clean and electric. Inside the room, the world felt suspended. There was no performance here, no cameras, no executives, just us. The intimacy that followed wasn't frantic like it had been at 22. It was layered with awareness, with choice. Every touch felt intentional, every kiss deeper. We explored each other with patience, relearning what 8 years had changed and what hadn't. Her hands cupped my face before she kissed me again, slower, almost reverent. "I thought about you," she whispered. "I know." When she lay beside me afterward, fingers tracing slow circles across my shoulder, the silence didn't feel uncertain. It felt settled. "We can't pretend this is accidental," she said. "It isn't." She turned toward me fully. "My retirement announcement is next week." I blinked. "That soon?" She nodded. "I was going to say the usual things. Thank sponsors, talk about legacy, keep it clean." "And now?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Now I want to say something honest." A quiet understanding passed between us. "You don't owe anyone your private life," I said carefully. "I don't," she agreed. "But I owe myself the truth." The weight of that landed differently than I expected. For years, I had believed I was the one left behind, but maybe she had been holding her breath too. She reached for my hand again, threading our fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. "This time," she said softly, "we stay." There was no grand declaration, no dramatic promise of forever, just choice. And for the first time, it didn't feel reckless. It felt steady. The press conference was scheduled for late afternoon, when the light was best for cameras. Of course it was. The temporary stage had been set up on the sand in front of the resort, the ocean stretching dramatically behind it, like part of the branding strategy. Banners displayed her name. Sponsors' logos lined the edges. Reporters stood in clusters, adjusting microphones and testing angles. I stayed toward the back. Officially, I was there as the lead architect overseeing the renovation. Unofficially, I was there because 8 years ago, I had watched her choose the world over us on a screen in my apartment. Today felt different. She stepped onto the platform in a simple white blazer, hair pulled back, expression composed. The crowd quieted immediately. She had mastered that presence, calm, contained, magnetic. She thanked sponsors first, coaches, her family, the usual script. Then she paused. "I started competing at 16, she said, voice steady through the microphone. Back then, I thought success meant never letting anything distract you." A few reporters nodded. I was wrong. That wasn't in the press packet. I knew because I had read it. The air shifted subtly. For a long time, I believed keeping my life simple meant keeping it small. 5-day summers, temporary things, nothing serious. A few journalists smiled at the callback to old headlines. I didn't. She glanced briefly toward the back of the crowd, toward me. The pause lasted less than a second. But I felt it. "Turns out," she continued, "some things don't stay small just because you pretend they are." The ocean roared softly behind her. "One of the biggest lessons surfing ever taught me is that you can't control the wave. You can only choose whether you face it." A reporter raised a hand. "Are you referring to something specific?" She smiled. "Not the practiced one from 8 years ago, the real one. I'm referring to the fact that I once said something publicly that didn't reflect how I actually felt." My heart began to pound. The crowd leaned forward slightly. 8 years ago, I described a summer connection as just a 5-day romance. There it was. The exact phrase. The one that ended us. I said that because I thought minimizing it would protect it. Or maybe protect myself. The wind picked up, carrying her words across the sand. But minimizing something doesn't make it less real. Silence. Not dramatic, not explosive, just honest. A reporter near the front asked carefully, "Are you saying that relationship meant more than you implied?" She didn't look away this time. "Yes." One word, clear, firm, no laugh, no deflection. The air felt thinner. "And do you regret how you handled it?" another voice called. She didn't hesitate. "Yes." The simplicity of that answer did more than any grand speech could have. She straightened slightly. "I spent years chasing titles and headlines. I don't regret my career, but I do regret letting fear decide what I called important." Her gaze found mine fully now. No distance, no ambiguity. "I'm not retiring because I'm done loving the ocean," she said softly. "I'm retiring because I'm ready to stop pretending that some things are temporary." The crowd murmured. Questions flew after that, about the resort, about her future, about what temporary meant. She answered professionally, carefully, without naming me. But she didn't erase me. When the conference ended, reporters surged forward, cameras flashed. I stayed still, letting the noise wash over me. 8 years ago, I had turned off the television. Today, I stayed. She broke free from the cluster eventually, weaving through people until she stood in front of me. Neither of us spoke immediately. "You didn't have to do that," I said finally. I did, she replied. For PR? A small smile. For me. There was no audience now, no microphones, just wind and salt and history. You didn't say my name, I pointed out. I didn't need to. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'm done pretending, Sophie. I won't make you small again. The weight of that settled somewhere deep in my chest. This wasn't 22. This wasn't reckless. This was choice. And for the first time since that interview years ago, the word serious didn't feel frightening. It felt possible. That night, the resort was quiet. The press had gone. The executives were celebrating somewhere with champagne and strategic optimism. The ocean, however, remained exactly the same, restless, constant, unapologetic. Mia and I walked down to the beach without speaking much. The sand was cool under our feet. The tide was rising slowly, the water brushing closer with each set. I didn't expect you to say that, I admitted finally. She glanced at me, hands in the pockets of her jacket. I didn't expect to either. We stopped near the shoreline. The moonlight reflected across the water, turning everything silver. I meant what I said up there, she continued. About minimizing things. I crossed my arms loosely, more out of habit than defensiveness. Why didn't you try again? I asked. After I didn't respond, she didn't answer immediately. I called. She said quietly. Twice. The second time it went straight to voicemail. My stomach tightened. I changed my number a few weeks later, I confessed. I told myself I was starting over. Her jaw softened at that. I thought you had decided it wasn't worth it, she said. You were the one who didn't answer, and you were the one who said it was nothing. We both let that sit. I was terrified, she admitted. Things were accelerating in my career. Sponsors were watching everything. They were already hinting that relationships were brand risks, and I convinced myself that if I acted like it was small, it wouldn't become something that could be taken from me. And instead, you lost it anyway. Yes. There was no argument in her voice, no attempt to soften it. The ocean crept closer, brushing our ankles. I didn't know how to fight for something personal back then, she said. Everything felt like a competition, even vulnerability. I looked at her then. Not the surf star, not the ambassador, just the woman standing barefoot in front of me. I didn't know how to stay, I admitted. I've always been better at leaving before I'm left. Her eyes searched mine, so we both chose silence. Yes. The simplicity of it felt almost unfair. She stepped closer, not touching me yet. 8 years is a long time, she said softly. I dated. I tried to convince myself that what we had was exactly what I called it. Just 5 days. And no one ever felt like that. Her honesty wasn't dramatic, it was steady. I kept thinking about that night on the beach, she continued, about how easy it felt, how you looked at me like I didn't need to perform. My throat tightened. I watched your projects online, she added with a faint smile. You make buildings feel open, like they're breathing. I laughed softly. You stalked my portfolio? Professionally, she said lightly. For the first time since we'd reunited, the tension wasn't sharp. It was warm. I don't want to be another almost, she said. I stepped closer now, closing the last inch between us. You're not. Her hands found my waist again, slower this time, deliberate. Mine slid along her shoulders, feeling the familiar strength there. This time, she said quietly, if something feels serious, I'm not going to shrink it. Good, I whispered. The kiss that followed wasn't urgent or explosive. It was certain. Her lips moved against mine with calm confidence, like we had finally aligned instead of collided. My hands cupped her face, and she exhaled softly against my mouth, the sound warm and grounding. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine again. No more pretending, she murmured. No more silence, I agreed. The tide reached our feet again, cold and insistent. We stayed there, holding each other under the moonlight, not because we were afraid of letting go, but because we weren't. 8 years ago, I had turned off a screen and decided the story was over. Tonight, I was choosing to stay in it, not because it was dramatic, not because it was reckless, but because it was real. The resort reopened 3 months later. Wood restored. Glass expanded. Open corridors designed to frame the ocean instead of competing with it. I had poured more than professional skill into that project. I had poured memory into it, light, space, breath. The launch event was smaller than the retirement announcement, more intimate. Investors, local press, A handful of former competitors, no oversized stage this time. No dramatic branding banners, just the ocean doing what it had always done. Mia stood beside me during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, not as a headline, not as a distant figure, but as my partner in something tangible. When she spoke, her voice carried calm confidence. "This place represents transition," she said. "Not endings, just new ways of standing." Her hand found mine openly, no hesitation, no coded language, just contact. After the guests filtered away and the sun dipped lower, we slipped down toward the water like we had 8 years earlier, only now there was no secrecy in it. "You ready?" she asked, holding out a board. I hesitated for effect. "I haven't practiced in a while." "You didn't practice the first time either," she reminded me with a grin. We carried the boards into the shallow water together. The tide was steady, forgiving. I climbed onto the board, heart racing in a way that felt nostalgic and new all at once. She positioned herself behind me instinctively, hands settling at my hips. The exact same place they had been the first day. But everything about it felt different. "Trust me," she said quietly. I laughed. "I do." The wave lifted us gently, not dramatic, not towering, just enough. I stood. For more than 3 seconds this time, wind rushed past my face, the horizon stretched wide and endless. And behind me, her hands didn't guide out of instruction, they steadied out of partnership. When we finally lost balance and fell into the water, we surfaced, laughing, breathless. She brushed wet hair from my face the same way I had once brushed hers. "You're not a beginner anymore," she said. "Neither are you." We floated there for a moment, boards drifting beside us. "You know," she began lightly, "if anyone asks, we could say this is just a 5-day thing." I splashed water at her. "Don't you dare." She moved closer, wrapping her arms around me in the water. "I'm kidding," she murmured. "I'm done minimizing." Her lips met mine again, slow, sure, no urgency to prove anything, just warmth and certainty. When we pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine, salt water dripping between us. "5 days were enough to start it," she said softly. "And 8 years were enough to understand it," I replied. The sun slipped lower, casting gold across the water. For a long time, I had believed that what hurt most was being called temporary. But standing there, arms wrapped around the woman who once reduced us to a headline and now refused to shrink us at all, I understood something else. It had never been just 5 days. It had been timing. It had been fear. It had been youth. Now it was choice. And this time we were staying.